Alright, so in the last lesson we just quickly went over physics and rigid bodies and all the colliders in Unity. I'm just gonna delete everything else and I'm just gonna keep one circle. So select everything and hold on Control and delete everything else. You know what? I'm gonna put in a square. So what we actually want to do is we want to move the player, but let's think about this as a programmer. What we want to do exactly is when we press on the left arrow key, we want to go in the left direction, and when we press on the right arrow key, we want to go in the right direction. So what I'm gonna do is actually gonna create a script. So player controller. So you have two ways of making a script. You can actually make a new script from here, which shows up new script and the name of the script, or you can actually create it here. So I'm just gonna make a folder called scripts, and I'm gonna right click again, go to create, and go to C# script. This will actually create a new C# script. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna name it player controller. Awesome. I'm gonna go to this circle right here. I'm gonna name it player. You can actually name it whatever you want, and you can actually name the script whatever you want too. You can actually just drag it and drop it here, or what you can do, instead of doing that, you can actually just click on add component and add the player controller script right here. So type in player controller and it'll come up right here, or you can type in the name of the script. So whatever you name the script, you can type it in right here and it'll show up. You have multiple ways of doing something. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna open this script. I'm gonna double click and I'm gonna open Visual Studio. So by now you should have Visual Studio installed. If not, then go install it and come back. Alright, so right now it opened a script. It's an empty script with two functions right here. So we have the public class player controller. So this is actually the name of our class or our script, player controller. And you have two functions right here, or two methods. First one is void start. It's actually written right here what the two methods do. So this function actually runs one time when the game starts. So when the first frame is called, whatever is inside these two brackets is called. On the other hand, the update function is actually the exact opposite. So the update function actually runs every single frame. So let's say you have 30 frames, the game is running at 30 FPS or 30 frames per second. In every one of these 30 frames, the update function is running. The update function is doing what's inside these two brackets. So we basically want to press a specific key and we want something to happen. So for example, if we want to type in an if statement, so if input dot get key down key code dot r, for example. Sorry, key code dot r. So when we press on the R key, what we want to do is debug.log you pressed R key. Now what's gonna happen is if we press on the R key, we want to print you pressed R key. So let's just go back. And now if we go to the console, we press on R, you pressed R key. And right here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. As long as I press it, because I have this collapse button pressed. So if I don't have it pressed, it'll show it one by one, but I'm gonna keep it pressed. What basically happened is we had basic input and then we outputted something. Alright, so now I'm just gonna jump into making the basic platformer controller. We want to get the rigid body class, so rigid body 2D, we're gonna call it RB. And when we want to get the rigid body 2D type class, we want it to be the exact rigid body in our player. So rigid body 2D. So what this basically means is that we want the RB class, the rigid body 2D class that we're calling RB in this instance. Which rigid body is the RB? Talked about this in the last lesson. Everything is a component, and when you type in get component, and the component you want, you basically get the component. So currently the RB is actually our rigid body component, our player's rigid body component. So we can play around with the player's physics right here using RB. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna type in float x input equals input dot get axis raw horizontal horizontal. Now, this horizontal area should be exactly how I typed it, with a capital H. So it's basically getting the horizontal Unity input system and it's storing it in a float called X input. So when you press the right key, X input equals 1. And when you press the left key, X input equals -1. And when you stay in your place and do nothing, X input equals 0. So I'm just going to show it in the Unity editor. Alright, so now go to Edit, Project Settings, and right here in the Input Manager, if we open up the axes, we have the horizontal axis. So the negative button, which equals -1, is actually the left key button, and the positive button is actually the right key button. The alternative of the negative button is A, and the alternative of the positive button is actually D. We're getting the horizontal axis right here, and we're storing it in the X input float variable. If we want to type in debug.log and X input.toString. So right now I'm just gonna print in the X input depending on what we press. Now if I go to the console, it's currently 0. So currently I'm not pressing anything, it's 0. Now if I press on the left arrow key, if I press on the left arrow key, as you can see, it's -1. As you can see, it started printing right here, -1. If I press on the right arrow key, it started printing in here 1. So how are we gonna move the player? Like I said, we can handle movement and physics from the rigid body component. So rb.velocity equals new vector 2 x input times, and we're going to create a public float, call it speed. This is going to be the speed of our player. I'm going to call it speed right here. And the y-axis, we're not going to move anything on the y-axis, so we're going to keep it rb.velocity.y. Awesome. So what this basically means is that we're going to control the rigid body's velocity. So the speed, I guess, of the rigid body. So let's talk about this in basic math terms. X input returns a value based on which direction is pressed. So let's say we pressed the right arrow key. So X input equals 1 times speed, which let's say speed is 50. 1 times 50 is 50. So the player moves 50 in game coordinates in the x-axis. And if you press on the left arrow key, X input equals -1. So -1 times 50 is -50. So the player moves -50 units in game coordinates. We're not doing anything on the y-axis. We're keeping the velocity the same as it is on the y-axis. So now we're going to go back. I'm going to set the speed to something like 10. And I'm going to go to game and press here. Now if I go left, the player goes left. If I go right, the player goes right. Awesome. But there is one more thing, which is that in some devices, in some stronger devices, the speed is going to be more. So we want everyone to have the same experience. So to counteract this, we're actually doing time.delta time. So time.delta time is the completion time in seconds since the last frame. So basically this line of code helps us to make the game frame independent. That is, in every single device, the speed is going to be the same. So we usually use time.delta time when we make changes in physics over time. So the physics changes can be the same speed in every device. So I'm going to make the speed something like 200, and I'm going to play. Now if I go left, and you can go left, you can maybe test it out, see what's actually best for you. But actually when we go out of play mode, when you exit play mode, always remember to not make any big changes while you're in play mode, because they're not going to save actually. So currently we actually have one setting and we actually remembered the setting we wanted. So always remember, never edit while in play mode.